Hello, everyone. This is Joshua Best here to introduce the first season of Why We Travel. I'm actually filming here in Thailand, which was the inspiration for the entire first season. Because while I was in Thailand for about 2 years, which was unplanned, but due to the pandemic, I had a lot of great experiences with locals and foreigners, whether they were expats or nomads or simply passing through, learning their stories and gaining so many positive experiences from them. So today you'll be listening to season 1, episode 1, which is called Why We Travel, The Hero's Journey. And it's an introduction of my personal story, what the podcast is about, and what inspired me to launch this project. So let's go back to the year 1987 in Flatbush, Brooklyn, an ethnic conclave for Caribbean migrants where my parents met and gave birth to me. They would then eventually journey down to Columbia, Maryland, which is a city founded in Howard County by a visionary named James Rouse in 1967. His intention of building this planned community was to eliminate segregation between racial, religious, and class segregation. So then, being someone with my background, growing up in Howard County or Columbia, Maryland, it would eventually set the stage for my cultural curiosity to the world. Now, putting more context to that cultural curiosity, as I mentioned, my parents are from Panama. And if you know a bit about Panama, when they built the canal, there a bunch of West Indian migrants from countries such as Jamaica and Barbados came to the country for work. And then that speaks to my ancestral legacy. So then, putting that together, I become a second generation American, born of Latino parents, but with West Indian heritage. And while Panama is a Catholic country or Christian country, and as is America, I, however, practice Judaism in my household. Except the Judaism I practiced, or my family practiced, was much different than what mainstream Jewish people do, because we were Israelites. So while I was practicing Judaism, I was very different. While my family was Latino, I didn't grow up speaking Spanish, even though they taught me Spanish. And while I did identify with West Indian people, I was still distinctly Latino when I was around them. Furthermore, being in America, and I do identify as black, I wouldn't identify as being African American, although I'm perceived as such, because culturally, they're very different. So in the end, I never fully belonged to any one group, while at the same time possessing a key characteristic that allowed me to tap into and know the passwords to various cultural speakeasies that were going on. My circumstances taught me how to navigate the waters of a diverse society. Furthermore, it propelled me to learn about other groups. Cross-culture communication became more than a tool for me. It became a survival tool. And what better way to learn about other cultures and other groups than to travel? So for me, step 1 of getting in touch with my own cultural identity was done through college. Well, step 1 and 2, but I'll get back to step 2 in a second. So step 1, I wanted to get in touch with more or just be closer to my black roots. While of course I had black friends and I felt black, naturally growing up in a predominantly white society in America, I often grew up feeling misunderstood or just out of place, and just there was still this yearning to get, I guess, let's just say, closer to my people. When I was going and applying to colleges, I applied to a historically black college university called FAMU, Florida A&M University, and this was in Tallahassee, Florida. And to me, that was perfect because not only did I have an opportunity to get in touch with my people, but then I get to escape the cold climate of Maryland for warmer weather. And so we call it a historically black college and university because, for those that don't know, they were founded largely in the South at a time where black Americans couldn't go to white schools. And so while they're founded for that reason, today in the modern times, they're still predominantly black. And then my time there, it was very cathartic. It was very fun. The experiences of like FAMU's Marching 100, learning a lot more about black Greek fraternities and sororities, and then just being surrounded with my people at all times. It was a wonderful experience. And now step 1, while it made me feel like America was more like home than it already did, naturally, I don't only identify with being American. I grew up with 2 proud Panamanian parents, and so I wanted to get in touch with that. And then thus I became an international student. It was my first time abroad by myself for an extended period of time, not on a family trip. Yet at the same time, it did kind of feel like a family trip because I was getting in touch with my more distant relatives and family there. And then I got to experience this country partly as a tourist, but then partly as someone that felt like they were from there, but not. And it suddenly gave context to just like these nostalgic memories that my parents would have. Like they grew up talking about putting condensed milk on shaved ice in the street, and then I'm suddenly seeing it. So it evoked these warm memories, even though it was the first time that I was there. And then I got to practice my Spanish and learn local colloquialisms. It was just a fascinating experience for me. And so spending an entire semester there, plus additional time I stayed before and after with my family members, helped me complete step two in terms of helping me feel and become more Panamanian. But then not only that, in this cluster of international students, there were people from various countries that did also come to Panama. Panama itself is a diverse society, both within the Panamanians itself. You know, you had your indigenous groups, you had all the mestizo people, you had lots of immigrants. I had a roommate who's actually grew up in Panama, but he had Japanese ancestry, while at the same time, expats from various different places. So it was almost like I then got to experience more cultures, but then in a Panamanian context versus an American context. So after my tenure as an international student at FSU Panama, I would then ultimately complete my degree in anthropology at the University of Maryland, College Park. So then the next phase, I would say like step three really of getting this cultural curiosity or continuing the evolution of it was through my professional career. So I knew I didn't want to stop with what I had already done. And so I wanted a professional career that not only required or gave me the opportunity to continue what I started in terms of learning other cultures and developing myself in that way, but really fueled it and put me in a place where I was surrounded by others who felt the same. So I would say my career really kickstarted when I was an international recruiter at an international development consulting firm. I did that in DC before I became an expat in Australia for nearly 2 years. And then ultimately I would then go to Boston at Northeastern University. And while working there, I also got a grad degree. And I chose Northeastern because it's a school that prides itself on its students having global experiences, the number of international students they had. And while there, I facilitated students that wanted to go abroad for a semester working. So while I was an international student myself, I then got to pay it forward with students that wanted to get professional experiences abroad before they graduated. Then I would also work at a startup company for digital nomads, and then also at another HR tech firm, both incorporating entities across Asia Pacific, but then also handling corporate immigration. So all of this seemed disparate, but there was this thread called global mobility that I realized that's essentially what I was doing. And I got a certification in exactly that, global mobility, while also getting my grad degree in international relations. So it ultimately culminated into me just becoming this professional facilitator of cross-cultural connection, having international experience, and helping people and helping companies get that experience as well. Throughout those experiences, I was essentially able to apply real-world application to the theory I was learning in university. It's one thing to learn about Indonesia in a textbook. It's another thing to go to Bali for a holiday. And it's an entirely different thing working on Indonesian projects for nearly 2 years. During that time, I learned how being social and having lunches with colleagues and partners was not just something nice to do, but an essential requirement for your job because it is the working culture there. And then also being a recruiter, and although it's still largely a patriarchal society, having very senior executives talking about how they have to run the job offers they get with their wife because they're the one person in the household that manages the money. Working or experiencing cultures from a professional context really just like opened my eyes and gave me a deeper understanding as to what was happening. Furthermore, it was interesting living in Australia and comparing my time there to living in Morocco for a month, where in many ways I felt like I had way more cultural faux pas happening by me or to me in a culture that seemed very similar compared to another culture, again, like Morocco, that is obviously much more or perceivably very different than America. But it was almost like because there wasn't this assumption that we understood each other, that it allowed us to understand each other more. And so my professional experiences, along with my travel experiences, just made me a much better communicator, helped me see just how important it is to have these interactions and how it just really created deeper interpersonal connections between all of us in the world. So now that you have a large part of my personal story and background, I want to continue that while getting into what this podcast will be about and the intention behind me launching Why We Travel. So I'll go back to my time at Northeastern University and when I really discovered how much of a geek I was for human migration. My favorite class by far was called Immigration and Labor. And in it, we learned this push and pull theories for human migration. And to put it very simply, there are factors that push people out of a country, and then there's other factors that pull them in, that draw them. So if you want to use a modern day example, you could think of a Venezuelan refugee who was pushed out of their country due to economic instability there, but then are drawn to a country like Panama because they speak the same language, it's close proximity, and it has a strong economy. So it essentially solves a lot of the problems that they're fleeing from. Or perhaps you could think of like an American digital nomad. Although the country has a strong economic position, maybe they're just saddled with student debt, and then they discovered a way to go to another country that has warmer climate, such as Thailand, allows them to help pay off their debt. And it's not just that, but there's also a community of thriving digital nomads already. So they can say, oh, wow, not only does it solve my problem, but I'm choosing this place because there's a community of people just like me. So it's, America's pushing them out in certain ways. Maybe it's more subtle than like the Venezuelan example, but then likewise too, there's still another country pulling them in. So when I see all that, and when I connect it to my personal experience and the experience I have with people working in international development or these students studying or working abroad, I just realize that on a base level, you have countless people who are evoking the power of travel to own their freedom and manifest this change in their environment for the purpose of wellness and self-actualization. And once we get more to the root of that, then that's when you really unlock the power and the beauty of travel. So now, what has then happened is all of these experiences and learnings I had from both myself and other people has culminated into me developing this philosophy that travel is inextricably linked to our own personal development, in a sense that we have our own hero's journey, and when you go abroad, it is essentially crossing this threshold that's the beginning of your quest into an unknown world that is the center and fuels your personal transformation. And so if you don't already know, the hero's journey is a literary framework that when you apply it to your own life can become a tool in which you're the protagonist of your own story. And then you have the power of narrating that story in a way that's most beneficial to you. And so with that, you need to be intentional about your reasons and where you're going. And then it will then ultimately help drive whatever change you seek. Consequently, I not only imagine, but have found communities of people like me around the world who see travel as an essential part of their hero's journey as well, which makes it a deeply enriching and personal exercise. But unfortunately, travel and tourism is most oftentimes not perceived as that. It's seen as like Westerners softly colonizing trendy locations, or backpackers just being extremely ignorant in the local context that they're in. But as I mentioned and have been discussing so far, that the story behind human migration is much deeper than that. Crossing national borders most often includes overcoming personal boundaries within yourself and across cultures. And that is why I started Why We Travel, to flip the paradigm behind the labels tourists, nomads, and expats with real stories from real people, in combination with academic insight so that we could better understand ourselves and the world we live in, and do exactly that, to ultimately unpack why we travel. Thank you so much for listening to Season 1, Episode 1 of Why We Travel, called The Hero's Journey. So if you enjoyed this episode, you want to stay tuned to the future episodes that we're releasing or any other content we have, please just check out the description box below. I also just wanted to use this time to promote an e-course we have releasing called Nomad by Design. This will be especially beneficial to you if you're interested in being a digital nomad, or if you simply want to incorporate travel into your life in a way to accelerate your personal development. Thank you again for watching, and stay tuned.